Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diversity and Discussion Book Club session. Today, we have Jennifer De Leon with us, who will be discussing her book, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. I am Anna Geraldo Kerr, library trustee, and I'm so happy to welcome everybody to today's discussion. I also want to thank the Needham Education Foundation, who was very generous in donating the funds for us to buy 65 books for a community, mostly to be shared with high school students. So we're very grateful for that. We are going to be doing, in terms of logistics, we are going to be recording the first half of the conversation just to discuss different topics about the book and different questions we have for Jen, the author. And then the second half, we are now going to record to allow for the community, for the participants to ask those candid questions that you may want to ask. So we're giving you the opportunity to be present, to be vulnerable, to be and authentic with your participation by not recording that part. So just without further ado, I turn it over to Jen Khan, who will be moderating.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I also wanted to extend a couple of thank yous. First, a special thank you to Paige Rouse, who obtained books, displayed them beautifully in the Needham High School Library, advertised them to students and distributed them. And thank you to Anna Geraldo Kerr, who is going to be monitoring the chat tonight, to Jennifer De Leon, and to everyone who's attending. So please, as we're just beginning now, please use the chat function to introduce yourself and say your name and what your connection is to the Needham community. So we will begin. Please keep yourself on mute, and I will ask questions of Jen, and I'll ask questions of the community. If you have a question for Jen or a question about the event in general, please ask it in the chat, and where Anna will watch and raise it to the group. And when I raise questions to the community, if you would like to participate, please raise your hand. Use the raise hand feature if you can, or if not, just raise your actual hand. So now to begin, the purpose of these book clubs is to create a community connection and a conversation about the subjects raised in Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. Some of you will have read this book and some of you will not have read the book, and that's perfectly fine. The questions that I ask will take the book as a starting off point, from which we can talk about our personal experiences and reflect on these topics. A note first also about language. As we talk about our own community, when we refer to students who live in Needham and attend the Needham schools, we can call them the Needham resident students of the Needham schools. And students who live in Boston and attend the Needham schools are called Boston resident students of the Needham schools. And every question that you ask, we know comes from a place of curiosity, respect, and a desire to learn. And we all know that sometimes when you ask questions, you may get the language wrong or not quite phrase things in a way that lands easily for other people. And I hope that we will kind of keep an open mind when people ask questions, and just stress that we'd rather you risk asking important questions using language that might feel clumsy rather than not asking them at all. We all bring an open mind to this conversation and assume the best intentions. And please also monitor your airtime. Now I can properly introduce Jen De Leon. She's the author of Don't Ask Me Where I'm From and the editor of Wise Latinas, an assistant professor of creative writing at Framingham State University and a faculty member in the MFA program and creative nonfiction program at Bay Path University. She's published prose in over a dozen literary journals and is a Grub Street instructor and board member. Her essay collection, White Space, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing, is the recipient of the Juniper Prize and was recently published by UMass Press in March of 2021. So I'll begin with a question for Jen. So Jen, what was the seed of the story? Like, how did Liliana come to you, and how did she change in the process of writing this novel?
Thank you so much, Jen, for the invitation and for creating this space. I'm grateful to Anna and to Gay and to all of the Needham community that really played a part in putting this Zoom room together. And I'm so happy to be here. This is honestly my favorite part about writing is talking about the stories and the essays and interacting with readers. And I was thinking about this event and I was thinking how, Jen, it's just so great to be friends with you and to know you for so many years. And you're really someone who walks the talk. I think a lot of people appropriately are excited and want to promote diversity and generate these kinds of spaces and discussions. And you do it. You're doing it right now. So I'm really grateful to you. And I was thinking too that the space that we're in right now really echoes and models what METCO strives to do, which is integration. And the program was really designed to address the problem of segregation in schools in Boston and surrounding communities. And so I just thought there was a lovely kind of parallel there. But yes, don't ask me where I'm from. Liliana is a character that I started writing into short stories years and years ago. And I put her in all sorts of trouble. And she and I had a lot of fun, but I could never place these stories in publications. Editors from literary magazines and journals would write me personal notes and say, "Oh, we love your writing, but this isn't quite right for us." Or they'd say, "Submit again, but this isn't what we're looking for now." And I admit I took those messages and thought, "Oh, maybe this just isn't a story worth telling. Nobody wants to hear it." But I learned through lots of ups and downs that I was writing YA and no one had ever told me. And I didn't really understand what YA was. And it has its own lane and its own ecosystem and world. And so once I discovered what YA was and the fact that I loved writing teen characters for teen audiences, I felt sort of like I was able to hit the gas in a different way. And so Liliana wanted a bigger stage than a short story, and I wrote her into a novel. And I decided to write it in third person, set in the 90s, because that's when I was a teenager. But I went to a conference and met with an editor, and the editor said, that's historical fiction, right? If it's set in the 90s. And I thought, no way that that's historical fiction. And she said, yeah, it is. So she said, have you considered writing it in first person and make it contemporary? And I thought, no way, I can't write from a teenager's point of view today. I don't know what they sound like. And as I was saying it, I thought, yes, I do. I taught in Boston Public Schools for over 10 years. I had sometimes 100 students on my roster. I definitely know what a teen sounds like. And I see Teresa there. It's so nice to see you. I know our paths crossed at Excel years ago. So I decided to write a kind of stream of consciousness and a messy first draft. And later I put in the plot and kind of all of that. But ultimately, it's the story of 15-year-old Liliana Cruz, and she's struggling to fit in at her new high school. She lives in Jamaica Plain. She was born there. She grew up there. And she is new to METCO in a fictional suburb called Westburg. All the while, her father is missing, or she thinks he's missing, but really he's been deported. And up until that moment, she had no idea that her parents were undocumented. So this event kind of cracks open her world, and she's a normal teenager trying to fit in, but then she's dealing with this drama. So her identity is kind of put right up to the light, and she's asking a lot of questions. So that's what the seed was. I guess I wrote Liliana in stories, but again, she wanted a bigger platform, so she needed a novel, and here it is.
That's great. That's such a great lesson too for newer writers who are just trying to publish and to understand how when they do receive rejections, from these magazines, there are so many reasons why, and it really might not, it's so important for writers not to take it personally as though, they're right, there's something wrong with their writing, but in fact, just they haven't found the right outlet. I think that's
Yeah.
it's a great message. Very early on, the novel defines the goals of the METCO program as the mission of METCO is twofold. One, to give students from Boston's underperforming school districts the opportunity to attend a high-performing school and increase their educational opportunities. And two, to decrease racial isolation and increase diversity in the suburban schools. In order to qualify for the program, a student must be a resident of Boston and be non-white. Eligibility does not take into account a student's record, including academics and behavior, English language proficiency, socioeconomic status, attendance record, or immigration status. And I'm curious, Jen, why did you feel it was important to spell that out in the beginning to your audience?
Yes, I really wanted the audience to understand what the METCO program was. And I needed a way to put that in the novel that felt organic and not like me, the author, coming in and sort of just planting it there. And I needed then Liliana to learn what it was. And it made sense. I think hopefully it works on the page because she doesn't really know what it is. And so she's like, oh, what is this program? Oh my God, my parents signed me up for it. Oh, and then she's reading the brochure and kind of like, well, it kind of sounds interesting, and there is no METCO brochure. I totally made that up. And I talked to someone in METCO and he was like, that's a good idea. We should do that. And so it's kind of like, does life imitate art imitate life? So, but I felt that I wanted to relay that information to the reader so they understood what Liliana was facing and what she was embarking upon.
And I have a follow-up question to our community here. Before reading this book, what did you know about the METCO program and where did you learn that? If you're a Boston resident, student, or family, what mistaken assumptions do people make about the program? Any thoughts? And to say that you didn't know very much at all, please, is a very valid and interesting point to share with us. Oh, Emily, go for it.
Hey, so I graduated from Needham High School in 2014, and I understood it to be that I think part one of like the brochure definition of students of color from Boston coming to schools that had more resources. And something that I never was talked about was like, oh, racial isolation is a problem where I live. So that's it. That problem was never like made apparent to me.
That's really interesting. Do other people have that similar experience? Oh, go for it, Erin.
Yeah. So I grew up in Needham as well, and went to school and graduated from Needham High in 2005. We also had METCO students in and amongst our class, and I just knew them as the kids that got bussed in. I didn't realize that there was, exactly like Emily, that there was a racial diversity and equity kind of part to all of this too. So it was interesting. It was nice getting to know them, and like they were perfectly pleasant people, and like they just left and we met at school again the next day. So yeah.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for sharing that. It sounds like there was a pretty segregated experience even within the schools.
Jen,
Yes.
could you repeat the question before somebody missed the question?
Sure.
Repeat it.
My question is, before reading this book, what did you know about METCO and where did you learn that? If you're a Boston resident, student, or family, what mistaken assumptions do people make about the program?
And I see Tom has his hand up.
Yeah, my first introduction to METCO was when I did my student teaching at Linfield High School, and that was in 1974. Okay, so that was a while ago. My next time was when my my children went to Needham High School, 98, 99, and 2004. And my son was friends with a couple of METCO students. So that's how I met them. And they were teammates in 3 different sports. And so therefore I got to meet their parents at games and things like that. So, but later on, I had an experience. I substitute taught for about 8 or 9 years at Needham High School, and I saw the more variety, the non-athlete METCO students, so male and female, and so I had a lot more interaction at that time.
Thanks, Tom. Let's take one more comment. Anna, do you know who's next?
I see Veronica and Marlene, if you can take 2.
Okay, we'll take 2. Go for it. Yeah. Veronica, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So I really can't recall when was it that I first heard about METCO. I do work with schools doing evaluations, but I feel like it has been a while. But again, for some reason in my head, I always thought it was Black students. I didn't think about like the diversity. So I really appreciate the fact that you included that information, because I was like, oh, it's also Asians or any other, not just like, Black, but like EL students. It can be so diverse. I really appreciate that being there and learning a little bit more about the program. And this is not exactly the question, but what happens to me now as a grown-up and living in Needham, knowing that there's kids in the program, as a parent, feeling like, how can I help these families, these students become more part of the community? And maybe we'll talk about that later, but that's something that my curiosity about METCO has gone to more recently. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Veronica, if you want to include that in the chat too, because I'd be happy to connect you with the METCO parent president, of the METCO MNPC. Yeah, if you're interested in being involved and seeing if you want to do some programming together. Marlene.
Both of my kids went all through the Needham schools. And so the 2 things. One, my older daughter was in school with Joe Moody, who is Sean Ellis's brother. So a lot of people here know of Sean Ellis. And so that was her first introduction, I think, really to a Black boy. And he was in her class for, I think, through 6th grade. I'm not quite sure. And then my other daughter in 1980 was in 1st grade and had a very similar experience we did. She was very friendly with a METCO student. And at that time, I think all the students were Black, but I'm not sure. Just like Liliana had, because that little girl came over to our house. And she was in awe. And it's not like we have some mansion, but to her, it was. And I remember clearly that she came in and she opened all the drawers in the kitchen and she looked at everything in the house and she didn't want to go home. It was very interesting. She wanted to stay. I think she came to play, and I also think she came once for a birthday party, but it really brought me back to that when I was reading it in the book.
Jen, may I read a comment here? There's from Needham High School student. Says, I go to NHS and I have friends in the program, so I know more about it than most people. However, I think in the last year I have learned even more and have been listening to those students more as they teach us about their struggle with racial equality.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. The second goal of the program, after providing educational opportunities for students of color, is decrease racial isolation in the suburbs. That's a huge burden to place on the backs of students. Do you think it's fair? Is the program successful? And if not, what would need to change for it to successfully combat racial isolation in Needham? Why is racial isolation a majority white community? Why is racial isolation in a majority white community harmful to all of its residents?
Yeah, such rich questions. I just want to thank everyone who raised their hand and spoke up, and it's just so great to be interactive. Usually it's me talking for 45 minutes and then we have Q&A for 15 minutes. And I love the design of this event, Jen. So thanks again. I will say that I have learned a lot about METCO when I was doing research for the novel. I read Susan Eaton's book on METCO, and I read about desegregation programs, school desegregation programs around the country. METCO is the original one. It's the oldest one, and it's about 54 years old now. And it was brought about by a group of parents who really were demanding more justice in the education for their children, and they brought it to the school committee. And what's interesting is that group of parents thought that METCO would only be needed temporarily, to address this problem of segregation. Oh, maybe a couple years, a few years, and here we are over 50 years later, needing it probably more than ever. And it's currently in 33 school districts surrounding Boston, which is a lot. It's a lot. And it's growing. And I think that's in part because of what you point out, which is this racial isolation in the predominantly white communities. And this is a problem for several reasons, but on a very practical level, it's not modeling or parallel to the real world. And so a lot of the, I hate to use the word, but like motivation or the draw for white communities to include METCO in their towns is to prepare the students to be in an environment that interacts with people from different ethnic backgrounds, because that's what they're going to need to do in college, hopefully, and definitely in the workplace. And so METCO really strives to kind of have that as one of the, again, selling points of the program. But on a social justice angle, of course, you want your children and your town to understand that people share the same human rights from all backgrounds, and that everyone deserves access to a quality education, and that you don't want students to have to leave their home to go to another town to access that education. It's problematic in that way, I think. Like, wait a minute, why do I have to take the bus for an hour, and sometimes during a snowstorm, 3 hours, and I really have to use the bathroom on the bus, and I'm a kindergartner, and I get to school and everybody's already been there? Or why can all of my friends go to birthday parties on the weekends and go bowling after school or do Girl Scouts, but I have to take the bus home because I'm already getting home at 6 o'clock as it is? So is it perfect? Definitely not. Is it better than nothing? Absolutely. And I think that it's getting better. METCO has a new CEO as of, I want to say 3 years ago. And Millie is outstanding. I want her to run for president. It's like, she's just so brilliant and really doing some new programming. And I think that's why this student in the chat who mentioned that recently there's some, I guess, at least some more dialogue and more conversations happening. I think that's in part to, I guess, the temperature of the country, right? But also the programming that METCO is striving to do.
Thanks, Jen. In chapter 4, Liliana arrives in Westburg for the very first time, and we see this wealthy white suburb through her eyes. So Jen, I was hoping you could read a little portion from this so we can get a sense of Liliana's voice.
Definitely. All right. So here's Liliana. And as Jen said, she's on the bus in the early morning coming from Jamaica Plain to Westburg. I must have dozed off because all of a sudden the sky was pink and orange and we were in the suburbs. I wiped drool off my chin with the back of my hand, hoping no one had noticed, and stuck a piece of gum into my mouth. There was actually traffic out here, except no one was honking or cussing anyone out. People used their blinkers, let each other turn at intersections. Crazy nice cars too, expensive looking. The neighborhoods all had big houses, big houses. I also saw things I knew the words for, but had never had a reason to name. Sprinklers, landscape truck, dog trainer. No joke, a van with the words canine etiquette and paw prints painted on it drove past us. Who says canine anyway? We drove down one street lined with pastel painted mansions, photo shoot ready lawns, and driveways dotted with abandoned basketballs and scooters and everything. People just left their stuff outside overnight? No way that would happen on my street. It would be like putting up a "steal me" sign. I saw a man jogging, an old lady power walking with her elbows out to the sides, a teenage guy delivering newspapers, like real newspapers. I thought newspaper delivery people were extinct or whatever. And they were all white, all white. My stomach started to cramp up. Did these white kids all really have their own cars? Were they all really allowed to drink beer and wine in front of their parents? Did they hang out with their boyfriends and girlfriends in their furnished basements? Or was it finished basements? Okay, maybe Jade and I had watched Mean Girls way too many times, but still.
Thank you, Jen. I love that passage because I mean there's so much in it, and we get the humor, we get like her down to earth personality, like there's so much there. So I have a question for the community.